Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, the great Hasidic master, penned this original prayer. Architect of the world, author of her story, grant me the courage to participate in the world's design, to join in the unfolding of her story. Today I want to talk about responsibility, about awareness of those around us, and complicity in tragic events even when they happen hundreds of miles away. Years ago, at my previous shul, I ran the largest conversion program in Chicago. During that time, I worked with a particular couple, both doctors. We'll call them Maya and Oren for our purposes today. Maya was from southern India, an emigre who was serving as a family doctor in private practice. Oren was a radiologist. The two met during their clinical internship. They found each other attractive, discovered that they had many common interests, and began dating. Not long after, they fell in love. Maya was nominally Hindu, but through Oren, she became increasingly interested in Judaism. The couple began to study through our program in 2007, anticipating a wedding in early 2008. They were in love, committed to one another, and devoted to pursuing a Jewish life. There was one problem. Oren's parents, especially Oren's mother, were against the relationship and rigidly opposed to the marriage. There was no good reason for this. Maya was an enthusiastic student of Judaism. Oren's family were members of another conservative shul in Detroit. This wasn't a problem with liberal Judaism. And Oren's family wasn't opposed to conversion per se. Their problem, was quite clearly Maya's Indian heritage, her brown skin, her race. In Oren's mother's eyes, no matter the year-long intensive course of study, acquisition of Hebrew language skills, regular attendance to services, field trips to the mikveh, and a kosher supermarket, none of it was enough. Maya could never really be Jewish. And Oren was, unfortunately, an enabler. I watched him, time and time again, affirm his commitment to Maya, to her path, to their love, to their lives together. But then his family would travel to Israel and make a point of leaving Maya behind. His mother refused to talk with her on the phone or welcome them into her house. Oren tried to intervene, but he wasn't willing to make the hard choice to insist on his parents' approval, to demand they show his fiancée more respect. There were moments of incremental improvement, glimpses of hope, but inevitably Maya would be shunned and shunted aside once more. In my office, she was mostly stoic, but I could see the slights, the backhanded compliments, the overt racism at times were taking their toll. Occasionally, she appeared on the verge of tears. It was the first time I became aware of the simple fact of racism within the Jewish community. I knew there were racist Jews, of course. I had heard my own extended family members say regretful and sometimes repugnant things. But until that moment, I had no idea that when every excuse was stripped away, when every affirmative reason to embrace a person of color was available, there are people, Jewish people, who believe, against all evidence, that Jews, all Jews, are white. In other words, that some of us could feel so strongly about the other that she, the other, could never be us. Maya's family back in India was completely nonplussed. They were ready to board a plane to America and throw a big Indian-style Jewish wedding for their beloved daughter. The wedding was scheduled for early 2008. Then it was delayed to June. Then, in a letter to my clergy colleague who was initially going to officiate, Maya wrote, "Oren's family has continued to resist the wedding in spite of knowing our plans and the engagement and my meeting up with them. They firmly believe that I have no right to be in their family and that my conversion is a hoax. Due to family pressure and other unforeseen circumstances, we have decided that we're not ready to go ahead with the wedding as planned and had to cancel the wedding date." My rabbinic colleague moved to New York to take a new pulpit in July, and Oren and Maya turned to me, Maya's conversion teacher, for guidance and wedding officiation. I'll confess, it was the only time I've ever counseled a couple to seriously consider not getting married. In the end, they insisted they wanted to be together, and I felt it was not my place to tell two adults what they could and could not do. The wedding was lovely, but it was not big. It was not a large Indian-inspired affair. We had a minyan on the bima in the sanctuary. I spoke to them from Deuteronomy. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your children may live. Maya and Oren knew blessing, but they helped me realize a curse that plagues far too many people, Jews sadly included. I've lost touch with the couple. I don't even know if they're still together. But I wonder what Maya was thinking this week when a domestic terrorist murdered 8 people, 6 of whom were women of Asian descent. I wonder what Oren was thinking. I wonder what Oren's mother was thinking. I know what Cherokee County Sheriff's Captain Jay Baker was thinking when he said of the 21-year-old gunman, yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did. I can guess what FBI Director Chris Wray thought when he claimed the murder of 6 Asian Americans at 3 locations was not racially motivated. I definitely know what Texas Congressman Chip Roy was thinking at the first congressional hearing in 34 years to address anti-Asian hate and violence when he said, there's an old saying in Texas about find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree. I know what Congresswoman Grace Meng was thinking when she, choking back tears, accused Roy, Trump, and the Republican Party of putting a bullseye on the back of Asian Americans across the country, on our grandparents, on our kids. This hearing, she said, was to address the hurt and pain of our community and to find solutions, and we will not let you take our voice away from us. And I'm clear what actor and producer Daniel Day Kim was thinking when he testified at that same hearing saying, if this were a synagogue or a black church, would we really be asking whether this was a hate crime or not? The answer, of course, is we would not. Because it was mostly women, because of salacious notions about massage parlors, because of the way puritanically minded Americans hold deep prejudice that exoticizes East and South Asian women and simultaneously degrades them, because we as a nation have not come to terms with a history that includes not just theft of land from indigenous peoples and enslavement of black people, but also the Chinese Exclusion Acts and Japanese internment camps. Because of all of this and more, there is space to question motives, to make excuses, to deflect violence with sex. Now, the massacre in Atlanta was not committed by a Jew, but by a Christian whose church has strenuously condemned his actions. And the victims, to my knowledge, were not Jewish. But I share the story of Maya and Oren because you better believe every single member of our congregation who is of Asian descent is feeling especially vulnerable this week. Because we are living in a time when anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence is persistently high, and rhetoric and violence against women is pervasive, and rhetoric and violence against people who trace their heritage to countries in Asia is skyrocketing. Women in San Francisco being punched and spat on. People being harassed and shouted at in Chicago and Washington, D.C. Violence against Asian women is particularly high, more than twice as high as that against Asian men. Anti-Asian hate crimes in 16 of America's largest cities increased nearly 150% in 2020. Notice I say rhetoric and violence, because there's no doubt that these haunting statistics are the direct result of both a massive increase in anti-immigrant and nativist rhetoric, and specifically invidious language like China virus and Wuhan plague and Kung flu. Language matters. People internalize messages they hear from leaders, from politicians and pundits. Now, Torah doesn't address anti-Asian racism, of course, but it does say something about the asham, sometimes called the guilt or the reparations offering. V'nefesh ki techeta v'sham'a kol Allah. If a person incurs guilt when he has heard a public imprecation, a slur, v'hu eid o ra'a o yada, and, although able to testify as one who has either seen or learned of the matter, im lo yagid v'nasa avono, he does not give information so that he is subject to punishment, what happens then? The person in question must bring a reparations offering. Different kinds of sacrifices are brought for different types of sins. For example, there are sacrifices appropriate for unintentional sins of commission, particularly grave ritual sins against God or against other people. In this case, we're talking about sins not of commission but omission, like if you hear language that you know can lead to violence and then say nothing. For most of us, in these cases, our intention is surely not to bring harm to anyone, but our silence, our unwillingness to act, to demonstrate, in Rabbi Nachman's language, the courage to participate in the world's design, to join in the unfolding of her story, that is also a sin. Morally speaking, writes Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of other human beings. Indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Look, overall, things are getting better in so many ways. Positivity rates are still too high, but vaccinations are increasing. An end to the pandemic seems to be coming. The stimulus bill passed. There will be more money in the hands of those who desperately need it. There is work to do in Annapolis, but several bills making their way through the General Assembly this year are promising and could bring real change to Maryland and to Baltimore. But make no mistake, the trauma of the past 4 years, the trauma of the past 400 years in this nation is far from over. To make meaningful progress as a country will take persistence and a greatly increased sense of shared responsibility. So, if you were horrified by the news this week, say something. Do something about it. Call your Asian American friends to check in. Maybe they're fine, maybe they're not. But ignoring it or assuming the slaughter of people who look like them hasn't affected them would be a miscalculation. Representative Mang, who I referenced earlier, sponsored legislation last May called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. The president spoke about it yesterday. It would expedite federal response to hate crimes during the pandemic. It has yet to pass. Make a call, send a letter, send 10 letters. One small but important thing we can do is to say their names. Name the victims so that they are not just a statistic. Authorities have finally released the names of all 8 victims. They are Jojitan, 49, Dayufang, 44, Soonchung Park, 74, Hyunjung Grant, 51, Yong A.U., 63, Suncha Kim, 69, Delana Yon, 33, Paul Andre Michaels, 54. Alcias Hernandez Ortiz remains in critical condition. He's 30 years old. Rabbi Nachman's prayer concludes this way. How I want to share in the responsibility of this world, to pray for her welfare, to care for her needs, to safeguard her treasures to work for her rectification. May the memory of those whose lives were taken in Atlanta be a blessing for those who knew them. And may we collectively work toward a world and America and the Jewish community defined not by hate, not by racism and bigotry, but by respect and dignity. Shabbat Shalom.